通胀之下，剑指何方？全球央行开足马力大印货币的今天，充沛的流动性泛滥，将全球送上通胀的快车道。2010年12月，中国上海浦东及国际金融投资博览会举行之际，以全球通胀下的投资攻略为主题的高端经济论坛上，通过知名经济学家对人民币升值、中国通胀等热点经济现象的剖析，使得中国企业及投资者能够寻找到正确的发展和投资方向。参加今天高端经济论的主旨演讲及圆桌论坛的嘉宾有：普雷斯科特，2004年诺贝尔经济学奖得主，著名经济学家；罗伯特·巴伯，美国经济学会原副主席，著名经济学家；王国刚，中国社会科学院金融研究所所长；董勤发，上海浦东新区金融服务局副局长。首先为大家发表主旨演讲的是2004年诺贝尔经济学奖得主、著名经济学家爱德华·普雷斯科特教授。他今天演讲的主题是金融危机与商业周期。
Good day. I'm honored to be here. I will be talking about financial crises and business cycles. First, about China. The Chinese economy, at current exchange rates, has recently become the second biggest economy in the world. We've all heard that. At purchasing power parity prices, it is now 80% of the United States, and almost certainly will surpass the U.S. in a few years. China has more people than the United States. It is still only 25% on a per capita basis, but this will be 50% in 2024 if current trends continue, and I expect them to. The set of rich countries, say at least half the level of the most advanced industrial country, as a definition, keeps expanding every decade. And it won't be long, and the countries that become rich, I'm talking about industrial, through interacting with the other rich industrial countries, stay rich. It's an absorbing state. There's really spectacular catch-up in Asia. When I say catching up, in the coming years, the U.S. is experiencing some problems temporarily, as you will hear subsequently, but the trend of living standards doubling every generation almost surely will continue. I call the current state of the U.S. the not-so-Great Depression. It's not as big as the Great Depression, and it's not a great thing to be depressed. It's depressed about 10% relative to trend and has been for over a year. The good news that over the last, it should be 12 months, the U.S. economy has bottomed out after falling for 17 months. The bad news, the economy is not recovering. When they talk about a weak recovery, how can you, there's no recovery. I hope there's one soon. I fear the U.S. will lose a decade of growth, as did Japan beginning in 1992. Why? Because the U.S. is doing what Japan did, adopting anti-productivity growth policies, subsidizing inefficiencies. Why is the U.S. economy so depressed? As I said, we don't know for sure until the data needed to answer the questions are available in a couple years. With censuses, they don't incorporate that information, and they get new benchmarks. They get better underlying sampling distributions. And it leads to revisions, both that are fairly sizable just before the census and just after the census for the few years, and they don't come out until a few years after the census. By the way, in the Great Depression, they followed a stimulus plan. They increased expenditures. They increased taxes. Well, I'm going to weaken this statement. Both times there was a shift to anti-free trade policies. It appears that the recent news is that the administration is backing off its earlier. Obama, as a senator, never voted for anything related to free trade. He was consistently against. Now, as president, just the position of the office, he's forced to behave more supportive. And the trade agreement with Korea is an encouraging sign. This is one of the few places where I think economists have had some positive influence. All economists are for free trade and openness. And then this managing the economy from the White House is a mistake. Hoover did it, Obama did it. Factors depressing the market hours. Well, it's end of a small high-tech boom. Overbuilding of houses. Spending increases that necessitate higher future taxes. Milton Friedman once said, to spend is to tax. I say to tax is to depress. Put those two statements together, to spend is to depress. Stimulus plans are depressant plans. I'm not talking about what China did when they increased expenditures. They made productive investments. You should make investments if the return exceeds the cost. And you shouldn't if they don't. There's been more paying people not to work. And there's been some anti-productivity growth policies adopted. One of the first things done with the new administration was to get rid of cost-benefit analysis for all new regulations. This was a policy in effect for 28 years under Reagan, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr. The appointments to some of the boards are not pro-competition. They seem to be dictated by special interest groups who attempt to preserve the status quo and block change. To progress, you need change. China is progressing fast. China is making dramatic changes. And people say that's the current financial crisis is the biggest one since the Great Depression. No, it's much. There were not many bank failures in terms of assets. They had a lot of small agricultural banks, and they were going, and farming was depressed in the 20s and 30s in the US, and a lot of these small banks went bankrupt. But the total amount of assets involved were about 2% of the total, were bankruptcy or suspension of payments. Businesses in 1930 paid huge dividends. Why? They lacked good investment opportunities, apparently. They perceived a lack of profitable investment opportunities. So they distributed to the owners rather than reinvest these funds. What led to the U.S. financial problems? Well, because of regulations, savings and loan banks were highly profitable in the 60s. Every big savings and loan bank had a member of a U.S. House of Representatives on its board. Then they were borrowing short, lending long. This was a system set up to foster home ownership. That was a political policy. There were various regulatory rents realized there, and who were paying that? The people. They borrowed at 3%, lent at 6%, and were on the golf course at 3 p.m. They had a pretty... So that was the first time of subsidizing housing or fostering home ownership with regulatory subsidies, using regulatory rents to subsidize, led to a financial crisis. And the similar thing happened with the subprime mortgage. We set up these Fannie Mae and Fannie Mac. We pretty much socialized the mortgage market. These institutions got too big to fail. Chinese central bank lent to them, and the U.S. government taxpayers guaranteed these loans. Well, remember this point. If persons expect higher tax rates on distributions from their businesses in the future, they rationally cut investments now. Given tax rates, they're about 40%.